You're listening to FMGRadio.com. Welcome to Generation Reinvention, how baby boomers are changing the future, with your host, Brent Green.
My guest this time wants you to have transformational experiences as you go through the business of being a consumer. Accordingly, he also advises businesses and nonprofits to stop being stuck on selling commoditized products and services and to think more in terms of the memories they're conceiving for customers like you. Creating marketplace value today means crafting customer transactions that are unforgettable events. He wrote, and I quote, "We are now in an experience economy where experiences, memorable events that engage people in inherently personal ways, have become the predominant economic offering. It eclipsed the service economy that flowered in the latter half of the 20th century, which in turn superseded the industrial economy, which itself supplanted the agrarian economy." With one of the world's most respected experts on experiential marketing and promotions, we're going to discuss how you can bring new vitality to your product and service offerings by engaging customers and constituents with unforgettable, transformative, and authentic experiences. B. Joseph Pine II is an internationally acclaimed author, speaker, and management advisor to Fortune 500 companies and entrepreneurial startups. He is co-founder of Strategic Horizons LLP, a thinking studio dedicated to helping businesses conceive and design new ways of adding value to their economic offerings. Joe Pine and his partner Jim Gilmore wrote The Experience Economy, Work is Theater, and Every Business is a Stage, published by Harvard Business School Press. This best-selling book demonstrates how goods and services are no longer enough. What customers want today are experiences, memorable events that engage each customer in an inherently personal way. Realizing that in a world of increasingly paid-for experiences, people no longer accept the fake from the phony, but want the real from the genuine. So Pine and Gilmore also wrote Authenticity, What Consumers Really Want, which was also published by Harvard Business School Press. Joe Pine also wrote the award-winning Mass Customization, The New Frontier in Business Competition. It details the shift companies are making from mass producing standardized offerings to mass customizing goods and services that efficiently fulfill the wants and needs of individual customers. And we're going to discuss all of this in this program. I'd like to welcome to the show Joe Pine.
Thanks, Brett. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Well, really, all four books that we're going to talk about today are constructed on a basic economic model. And so to help our listeners get the big picture from the beginning, why don't you talk a little bit about the progression of economic value?
Sure. The progression of economic value basically does describe millennia of economic history. Because in the beginning were commodities, the things you grow in the ground, raise in the ground, or pull out of the ground, animal, mineral, vegetable. Then you extract them out of the ground and sell them on the open marketplace. Commodities are the basis of the agrarian economy that lasted for millennia. But then with the Industrial Revolution, we shifted into an industrial economy based off goods, the physical, tangible things that we touch and feel. And in the 20th century, we shifted from that industrial economy then to a service economy, where services became the predominant economic offering, what customers were looking for again. And services are basically the intangible activities that companies perform on behalf of an individual customer. Well, what I realized then is that in the latter half, late in the 20th century, and now particularly in the 21st century, we've made another shift. We've shifted into an experience economy where experiences are now becoming the predominant economic offering. And as you said, experiences are memorable events that engage each and every person in an inherently personal way. And when you create that memory within them, that's when you know that you've created an experience. So what's happened is that the greatest portion of gross domestic product, of GDP, has shifted into experiences. The greatest part of employment has shifted along with it. Where agricultural today employs less than 2% of the people, manufacturing employs less than 10% of the people. In fact, I can remember an article earlier this year in Bloomberg Business Week that talked about how there were more unemployed in the U.S. than there were people working on manufacturing lines. And now that shifting in employment is moving from services and into experiences.
Okay, so you extract commodities, you deliver services, you stage experiences, and then you've added one to your hierarchy, which you render. What is that?
Well, the fifth and final economic offering, this progression of economic value, because it recognizes that just as goods have been commoditized, shifting us into a service economy, as services have been commoditized, shifting us into an experience economy, that experiences can be commoditized as well. And the fifth and final economic offering is therefore when you use experiences as the raw material to guide your customers to change, where you help them achieve their aspirations, and that I call a transformation. So a transformation is the fifth and final economic offering, where you're helping customers achieve their aspirations. So healthcare is about transformation, management consulting is about transformation, fitness centers, universities, etc. And it's all where people are looking to be changed in some way.
Okay, so again, for the benefit of our listeners, this is an economic model.
Yes.
And I think the question our listeners should be asking, am I creating experiences? Are they authentic? And am I transforming customers in the process? If you're just delivering products and services, you may be stuck in the 20th century, so to speak. So
Right.
Let's begin with your body of work, Joe, and talk about mass customization, because this is what puts you on the map. And what is mass customization, and is it inherently a technological phenomenon?
Well, mass customization is giving every individual customer exactly what they want, but at a price they're willing to pay. It's basically efficiently serving customers uniquely. I discovered it when I was a strategic planner at IBM, and I read Stan Davis's unbelievable book, Future Perfect, back in 1987. And he's the one that actually coined the term mass customization. And it was a chapter in that book. And I recognized, well, this explained everything I've seen at IBM, that our customers were increasingly distinct and different, and one of the systems that we created in different ways, but yet we had to do it at very low cost. So actually spent time getting that into our plans and strategies at IBM, and spent a year at MIT getting my master's degree, and I decided to use that time to really study this. And then I turned my thesis at MIT into that first book, Mass Customization, which came out in 1993. Then I subtitled that book The New Frontier in Business Competition. So think about when Stan Davis coined the term, it really was an oxymoron. People had no idea, how could you get both mass and customization, efficiency and uniqueness at the same time? And when I wrote the book, it was still the new frontier. Well, now in the past 20 years, it's become today's imperative, where companies really need to figure out how they work with individual living, breathing customers, whether those are consumers or whether those are businesses, and using the principles of mass customization, figure out what each wants, and then get that information back into operation so you do something differently for each and every customer.
There's an interesting parallel, Joe, I was thinking about, because when I was chairman of the Colorado Springs Convention Visitors Bureau, an industry that is very much an experience industry, mm-hmm. I was a part of a committee to decide to buy the AS400 IBM, which had been mass customized with specialized software to run a Convention and Visitors Bureau. So how about that for a parallel?
Well, I did mention it earlier, but that was the system I was working on.
Right.
At that time. And I for the AS400 development, I ran the group that brought customers and business partners into our development process. so that we could announce it with thousands of applications, and we could have a big bang and get the higher quality in that. But that it's through that project that I realized that, hey, every one of these customers is unique, and that's what every business needs to realize, is that their customers are unique. We may have been willing to subsume our individual or forego our individual desires in order to be able to get products that we could afford with the advent of mass production, which of course was a huge economic boon to this country and to the world. But now we don't have to make those sacrifices. Now we can, in fact, get what we want, but do it at with low cost, with high volume, with great efficiency.
So, again, this book was written in '93, and that was just about the time I was on a review decision committee to determine whether or not to buy the AS400, and then the specialized software, which was designed to appeal to us, the customer, which was the visitor industry. What is happening in the world of mass customization today that impresses you? Who's doing what? Stands out.
Yeah, the huge thing is that the internet has opened up the ability to converse with individual customers, millions and millions, and potentially billions of them around the world at incredibly low cost. And there are companies that are using the internet to be able to figure out what customers want by providing them some sort of a design tool. You can design your own M&Ms at mymms.com. There are scores of clothing sites and apparel sites where you can get custom shirts, custom jeans, custom shoes, pretty much anything you want. And so it's just become a huge virtual place for mass customization. But then it also holds true that one basic principle of mass customization is digitization, because anything you can digitize, you can customize. Once it enters the realms of zeros and ones, you can instantly change a 0 to a 1 and vice versa. So in many cases, the product itself can be mass customized. So think about when the product itself can be digitized, right, then it's easy to mass customize, like with Pandora and other sites that basically allow you to create your own music station. And by figuring out what are the songs you want, they can create a playlist that matches your taste, including putting in things, groups that you've never heard of before. But it can figure out that you're probably going to like this, and if so, you can rate it highly. If not, you can rate it lowly, and you won't hear it again. And so it's because it's digitized that they can just instantly slot in any piece of music that they think is going to be appropriate for you.
I'm amazed with Pandora. I listen to it frequently, and I have about 20 different radio stations. And what impresses me the most is the ability to use an algorithm, if you will. The Music Genome Project is really what it's called behind the scenes, to figure out if I like Bob Dylan, what other artists I'm going to like that are scientifically related to the musical tones that Bob Dylan creates. That's a phenomenal example of mass customization. There may be 1,000 people out there with a Bob Dylan station, or maybe 100,000, but each one of them might get a slightly different one because as you listen to the songs being presented, you vote up with your thumb or down with your thumb, and it then tightens the idea of the radio station you've created. So it's amazing.
Right, and it's not like you're locked into that, because again, as new music comes out, it takes that genome, it compares it to your desires, and is able to bring you new music that you're likely to like as well.
Absolutely, yeah. That's very cool, because it has introduced me to new artists. Well, I think that is a phenomenal example of mass customization, and something that we can talk about more as we move further into our conversation about the experience economy and authenticity. So we're going to take a short break for our sponsors. My guest is Joe Pine, co-author of The Experience Economy, Authenticity, and a new book we're going to talk about called Infinite Possibility. When we come back, we're going to talk some more about the experience economy and what marketers need to know, especially those of you who are planning online and offline businesses to target baby boomers. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the FMG Radio Network. And from our family to yours, we would like to wish you a very happy holiday season and a magical new year.
Prior to beginning his writing and speaking activities, my guest Joe Pyne held a number of technical and managerial positions with IBM, which we talked about briefly. And as we talked about, he was involved in the development of the System 400 computer for IBM, and he managed teams that brought customers and business partners directly into the development process of the system, which all of us should be doing in terms of designing and developing our businesses. So let's begin at the beginning with the experience economy. What, in a nutshell, is it? You touched on it briefly at the top of our discussion, but you talk about attending a coffee manufacturers conference in Milan, Italy, and you had an interesting observation. So let's start there.
Yeah, I remember that. It was this boardroom conversation with a number of folks, and one was the vice president of a global coffee company, and he said something that floored me. And this was about 10 years ago, but still, he said that there's been no innovation in the coffee industry in 15 years, and I responded, "Are you kidding me? Have you never heard of Starbucks?" Because for him, innovation was solely in goods. That's how he constituted his business. That's what they thought their business was in coffee goods that they would put on a grocery store shelf. And Starbucks came along and innovated a coffee drinking experience, one that allows them to get far more value for the coffee that they sell than the manufacturers. I mean, if you look at the future price of coffee in the newspaper, which tells you it is a true commodity, and convert it from a per ton to a per cup basis, it costs maybe 2 or 3 cents per cup. Those coffee manufacturers take those beans, they grind them, roast them, package them, put them on a grocery store shelf, and they get 5, 10, 15 cents per cup of coffee. But if you take those beans and you brew them for a customer in a vending machine, in a kiosk, convenience store somewhere, you're going to get 50 cents to $1.25 for a cup of coffee. But if you surround the brewing of that coffee with the ambiance and theater of a Starbucks, all of a sudden you're getting $2, $3, $4, even $5 of value. And so you got one industry with 4 distinctive levels of value, depending solely on what business they think they're in.
Okay, and in this progression of economic value that has used to have experience at the top of the hierarchy, you've added one other level that you touched on, and that is transformations. Is it possible for me to go to Starbucks and have a transformation? And what do you mean by that, in effect?
Well, it's certainly possible for you to go to Starbucks and have a transformation, although they don't gear their offerings to enable that. But you think about, are there people who have met at a Starbucks and eventually gotten married? Are there business deals that have reconstituted a business and changed what it's about at a Starbucks? Are there relationships that have been formed or broken there? Are there people that have realized that they have too much caffeine in their lives and want to change that? All of those things have happened. All of those are fundamental changes in who we are as individuals, whether they're individual consumers or individual corporations. If you think about this progression of economic value again, it's basically a movement towards greater and greater individualization. That commodity offerings are these arm's and length things that we hardly ever touch and feel anymore. Goods are objects that we own, like the clothes that we wear, the cars that we drive, and so forth. Services are activities performed on those objects, like changing the oil in your car, cleaning your clothes, or on yourself, like cutting your hair. But experiences for the first time actually reach inside of us, and they create that memory. Well, what transformations do is, as they're reaching inside, they're actually changing us in some fundamental way. And that is a different offering. That's a distinct offering. And that is the fifth and final offering in that progression of economic value, where you're using experiences, again, as the raw material to guide customers to change, to help them achieve their aspiration. For there's no more economic value you can provide than to help someone achieve his aspiration.
Well, I certainly know that, first of all, I have had transformative experience at Starbucks because like you as a writer, I occasionally just go to a Starbucks because I want that buzz and activity. Plus, I want a venti latte while I'm at it, of course. uh, but there are some very catered-oriented kinds of coffee houses in Denver where I am, such as Stella's in Washington Park.
Yep.
And you can go to Stella's and have some amazing art gallery experiences because they transform into art galleries. I actually had a photo display in Stella's, and then of course they have folk music and poetry readings and cowboy storytelling. So clearly you can take a Starbucks kind of environment and make it a transformative experience where you might discover the music artist of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My partner, Jim Gilmore, actually, and I've actually recently updated the experience economy. As you mentioned earlier, it came out in 1999. But now we've just come out with an updated edition in paperback for the first time that has a whole new level of exemplars, many, many new exemplars, as well as new ideas, new frameworks, and also, sort of new thrusts that put it into the context of today's economy. Because a lot of people think, well, as we've had this global economic crisis, do we have the money to spend on experiences and that? But it is a fundamental change in the very fabric of the economy, and any temporary slowdown is not going to change that.
Well, as a matter of fact, that was a perfect segue, Joe, to a question I wanted to talk to you about, because I was going to mention the new experience economy, which just came out in July. And a couple of examples that you use. One is American Girl Place. And I wonder if you can take this particular marketer and organization as an example of the new experience economy. What is the American Girl Place and what makes it special?
Yeah, it's not just a great example. In fact, it is the premier exemplar. Jim and I have an annual event every year in September we call Think About, that we take around the country, and in it we announce an Experience Stager of the Year award winner, or XP award. And American Girl won our very first XP award we ever gave out in 1999 because of the American Girl Place. And I don't know if all of your listeners are familiar with this company. They certainly ought to be. But it is a manufacturer at heart, right? It designs and then has manufactured dolls. It was founded by a school teacher, Pleasant Rowland, who wanted to teach girls about American history. So she put all of these dolls in various time frames in American history. And she always worked with consumers via catalog, over the phone, eventually the internet and that. But then they decided to get into the retail business and open up their own retail outlet. But it's not a retail store. It is an experience place. And the first one just off Michigan Avenue opened up in November of 1998. And I can still remember that about 6 months later, my wife flew our two daughters to Chicago just to go there. And they say that the average person walking through those doors doesn't leave for 4 hours because of all the wonderful experiences that they have. They have a cafe where you can have a grown-up dining experience for tea, for lunch, for dinner, including having a doll with its own little place setting there at the table with you for an admission fee. They have, in the original American Girl Places, they had a theater where you could have a live stage production about American girls and American Girl Club, and then where these girls take on the roles of each of these dolls in American history. There's a photo shoot, a hair salon. They have the whole birthday parties in there, and all of these wonderful experiences. I remember, my daughters being exceptional. They spent over 5 hours in the place. And when they got back to their hotel room, they called me up on the phone and told me about all the exciting things they had done at the American Girl Place. And as they were talking, I began to add it up in my head. And I figured out that they had spent over $150 in the place without buying a thing. just for the admission fee experiences. And then, of course, they came back with these huge bags filled with another doll apiece, more furniture, more books especially, all of these as memorabilia for the experience. So the American Girl, now owned by Mattel, actually, they understood, perhaps before anyone else, the basic principle for marketers in the experience economy, and that is that the experience is the marketing.
That is obviously a great example, and one of these days I eagerly hope I can take a child that I know into the American Girl place and check it out. It sounds like a fantastic experience. In fact, I recall that when I knocked around with Joe Pine in the REI flagship store in Denver,
Yep.
which with the senior vice president of marketing for REI, Recreational Equipment Incorporated. And what was your impression of that venue, just as another example? Because Denver has one of the two major flagship stores for
Yes.
that marketer.
Right. It is an amazing experience there. I mean, you go in, you're just wowed by the architecture, by the design of it, but then they have all of these actual experiences in it, including the emission feed experiences, being able to climb the mountain in the store, as well as going a kayaking experience on the river right outside the mountain. When we went to that store, Brent, the admission fee for that mountain was $5 if you were not a member of the co-op, and then it was free if you were a member. But a couple years after that, I was in the Seattle flagship store, where they're headquartered, and I took a group there. We're doing an experience expedition to Seattle, so we were going to all these different experiences and learning what principles that we could have learned from them to apply to their business, including the original Starbucks and the Pike Place Market there. And all of a sudden, it wasn't $5 and free if you're a member. It was $15 for non-members and $5 for members. And I started to ask them why they had changed that, and instead I said I already knew the reason. I says you did this because people weren't showing up, right? She said, yeah, they make reservations and then they wouldn't show up, so we decided to have them put a little more skinny in the game. And that's the key thing with admission fees, because admission fees, charging for time, is what truly differentiates an economic experience. And so many companies, they create experiences, they get into the business, but then they don't have the courage to be able to charge admission for it. And what you find that if you don't charge admission, then customers won't value it.
Well, that's an interesting piece of advice and one that I had not thought of, but yes, that does address that. And again, the REI store will capture you in every department. If you try on a down coat, you can go into a freezer that's below 0 degrees to see whether or not you think the down coat is working. Then you can go into Starbucks, of course. They have an attached Starbucks where I've spent a few hours writing and enjoying my venti lattes and so forth. So Jim Gilmore, your partner, talks about a concept that maybe we can touch on briefly before we take another break, and that is that we should ing the thing. ING the thing.
Yep.
Kind of where's that? What's that all about?
Well, we as we were writing the book, The Experience Economy, we realized that we just naturally use gerunds. Those are the words that end in ing. And we realized that anytime a word ends in ing, it means that you are experiencing it right now at this moment. Climbing, bicycling, drinking, kayaking, all of those sorts of words, they mean you're experiencing it. So what we recognize is that what manufacturers need to do, because they're sort of 2 steps away from the experience economy, and so many of them have gotten into services, and so many manufacturers now, like American Girl, and we could talk about Apple stores and so many other examples, have gotten into the experience business. But one thing they can do immediately is that they can ing the thing. In other words, focus on the using of the experience, of the good, on the experiencing of it as a way of enhancing their goods. And so you can see that in many different examples. The one we always like to point out is the Gumball Wizard from Global Gumball, that's selling a gumball. That's all it is. That's a manufactured good that they are selling. But they were the first ones to create an experiential way of doing that. So when you put in the Gumball Wizard, when you put your coin in the slot, you don't get a gumball, at least not right away. Instead, you get this gumballing experience as it goes spiraling down, clickety-clack as it goes. There's no functional purpose whatsoever for this device, but yet it increases the value of the gumball because of that experience of of retrieving the gumball in that way.
Fascinating. Well, and it just boggles the imagination how particularly manufacturers can ing their thing. And this is just one of the many concepts that my guest Joe Pine and his partner Jim Gilmore address in the experience economy, and certainly take to new levels in the newest version of the experience economy. And if you are interested in becoming an expert in this particular arena, then you're going to want to check out Pine and Gilmore's Experience Economy Certification, which is an in-depth training experience. How often do you have that, Joe, by the way?
We do a public course once a year, usually the first week in August. So on August 1st of this year, we'll be doing that in Cleveland with a number of people that are signing up. We have over 83 certified experience economy experts around the world, and many of those in private courses that we've arranged for individual companies.
Okay. And then the other way that an individual interested in really getting this, because obviously we can't even begin to skim the surface of what you can understand about the experience economy in the course of this 1 hour interview. But then you have what you mentioned earlier, it's the Think About. And what is that?
Think About is our annual event where Jim and I get an opportunity to practice what we preach. You know, we put on our own experience, and it's unlike any other conference that you'll ever go to. It's, we don't even call them a conference. It is an event. This year, it will be September 21st and 22nd in Del Mar, California. We move it around every year to different locations. And it's just a great way to meet other like-minded professionals who are embracing the experience economy and learn a set of ideas and principles that you can apply to your own business in incredibly experiential ways.
Okay, well, that's good information. And I'll tell you what, the invitations to these events are keepers. I have kept every one of them I've received because they are clever, they're creative, they engage you in an experience just by opening the mail. So when we come back, we're going to transition, if you will, a bit from talking about experiences to authentic experiences. Stick around, we'll be right back.
Be sure to join us at fmguniversity.com, where we can turn your passion into business within 30 days, put some fun back into your life, and show you how to make money and do good for yourself and others. That's why we're called FMG, Fun, Money, Good. Get started today. Visit us at fmguniversity.com.
Welcome back to this fascinating discussion with Joe Pine. Now, if his voice sounds vaguely familiar, it might be because he frequently is quoted and appears on various television media such as Good Morning America, but he's also often quoted in the print media such as Forbes, the New York Times, Wired, Business 2.0, USA Today, Investors Business Daily, and on and on. He has addressed the World Economic Forum and is a visiting professor at the University of Amsterdam. Boy, did you ever pick a place to have an educational experience. And he's a reoccurring guest lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Let me digress by just asking, how did you get connected with the University of Amsterdam?
They actually, interestingly, invited me out there back in 1999, early that year, to come and speak on mass customization. And I said, well, if you like that, I got this new book coming out you really like. And so it just led to a relationship where I worked with them in their new media program that they had there, and it's brought me to Amsterdam, so many times. I actually helped co-found with the university there a European Center for the Experience Economy, which has yielded a lot of value in Europe for companies that are looking for research and education and consulting on experiences.
Well, I can also say that, for a place on this planet to have a holistic experiential event, then Amsterdam definitely provides it, as a matter of fact. And you don't even have to walk into a coffee shop to get that.
Yeah, that's one place where I got to be careful to say cafe, not coffee shop.
Wink, wink. Well,
That's
anyway,
right.
Let's move on to what you actually mean by authenticity. And maybe you can answer that question by bridging what's the difference between fake and faux.
Well, in fact, it's from all my trips to the Netherlands that I originally became interested in the topic because the Dutch would always bring up this aspect. They'd say, you Americans, you like your plastic, your artificial, your Disneyland type experiences, whereas we Dutch like our real, authentic, natural experiences. Of course, I had to point out to them that they live in a country every bit as manufactured as Disneyland. There isn't a square meter of ground in the entire country that hasn't been reclaimed from the sea or otherwise moved, modified, and manicured to look as if it has always been there. They even have this national phrase. I didn't learn this till later, but they have the phrase that God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands. But yet they had this desire for authenticity, even though they lived in a manufactured land. And that's what Jim and I realized is that it's really concomitant with the experience economy, that when life becomes a paid for experience, it's just that people increasingly question what is real and what is not. And increasingly, they don't want the real from the phony. They don't want the fake from the phony. They want the real from the genuine.
Right.
And so authenticity has become the new consumer sensibility, the primary buying criterion by which people choose who to buy from and what to buy.
Well, I know you make a fairly big deal in your writing and your speeches about Las Vegas because it is obviously experience central worldwide. But to be honest with you, I think of my moments in Las Vegas, if I'm in Paris, is pretty much an ersatz moment. It ain't Paris. So how do you bridge the gap between basically a fake environment that recreates authentic experiences? How does that work together? It boggles my mind a little bit.
Well, yeah, it will boggle your mind. It's the most philosophical of the books that we've ever written because we had to really dig down into the depths of this issue and figure out what it's about. And so one of the conclusions that we came to is, if you read philosophers, is that all economic offerings are in fact fake. Ontologically, in the very being, they are fake. Because they are, manufactured out of whole cloth. They're not natural in the world. They are using the height of technology, and they are being sold for money. Anytime you do something just for money, we got this phrase, sell out, right? Then you're a sellout and you're not being authentic. And that's just the very nature of it. But yet you can render those offerings to be perceived as real. You can create the perception within people that they are real, and people have that perception all the time. You know the difference between Paris, Las Vegas, and Paris, France. And one you're going to view as real, and the other you are generally going to view as fake. But they're both manufactured places.
In a way, that's true. Well, to help our listeners understand and maybe make this more concrete, you talk about 5 genres of authenticity, and maybe we can touch each one briefly as to what you mean by that. So let's begin with natural authenticity.
Right. Well, natural authenticity is where we tend to perceive as authentic anything that exists in its natural state, that comes in or of the earth, that is not artificial or synthetic. Think about the rise of organic foods over the past decade or two. That's an appeal to natural authenticity, that it's not manufactured, it's not been using as synthetic pesticides and so forth. It is real in our perception.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I just the next one then is, as I'm sure you're going to point out, is original authenticity, where we tend to perceive as authentic anything that possesses originality in design. That's the first of its kind, that's not a copy or an imitation. And there you can look at almost anything that Apple does, how they have this just, design aesthetic that makes, even though they hardly ever originate a category, which is another way to appeal to original authenticity, but they make it their own because of that design prowess that they have, that we view it as completely and utterly original.
Original and authentic iPods, in effect.
Yes, exactly.
I was going to mention on the natural authenticity, and I've had a couple of experts on my program that talk about, lifestyles of health and sustainability, which is maybe a parallel track where you have this entire growing market segment now representing almost 1 in 5 American consumers, that are hugely committed to organic foods and natural living and organic cotton and all of the things that we associate with the natural world. So obviously there's a yearning for people for that kind of authenticity.
Well, that's the third genre of authenticity where we tend to perceive as authentic anything that is done exceptionally well. It's executed individually and extraordinarily by someone who demonstrates human care. And that's another place where mass customization connects in, because when it's done just for you, when you become an exception to the process, the normal mass production process, you're going to view that as authentic. Or anybody that think of like a Ritz-Carlton and how they just exceptionally take care of you in their hotels on an individual basis. Or when you're an exception to the industry, like Southwest Airlines is, how different they are than every other airline, and people tend to view them as authentic versus the others.
I was just at the Broadmoor Hotel, which is a 5-star resort you might be familiar with, Joe, this last weekend. I used to hang my spurs there because I was the advertising public relations director. And they've added, like $150 million of enhancements to the resort since I was there. But I came away from this weekend feeling that exceptional as well as original authenticity from a resort that's been made anew in the last 20 years.
And that's a great point too, is that you don't have to just decide, here's one genre, this is what we're going to do, or rather this is what we're going to be, but you can you can take from all 5 genres of authenticity and figure out which are the right ones, or in different situations how you render authenticity with 1, 2, 3, or even 4 or 5 of them.
Back to our brief discussion about Paris, it kind of segues to your next example of authenticity, which is referential authenticity. And I think you make an interesting point about Paris in particular, as it stands in Las Vegas versus the real Paris.
This is where you, in fact, can perceive Las Vegas as, or parts of it anyway, as authentic, because of referential authenticity is when we refer to some other context, that we draw inspiration from human history and tap into our shared memories. And that's what Paris, Las Vegas does. That's what the Venetian does in Las Vegas, even New York, is that they referentially refer to something that we do perceive as authentic. So it's like authenticity once removed. And yeah, we can tell the difference, but if they do a good job, if they honor it as opposed to parody it, if they draw from it as opposed to make fun of it, then we can say, hey, I can see the authenticity in here. And Paris does a great job. I think the Venetian does an even better job of reverently honoring the original through referential authenticity.
And I think you also make an interesting point that, quite frankly, a small percentage of Americans actually travel to Paris, France. And so for some people, their only taste of Paris is going to be in Las Vegas. So there is a value there that doesn't matter that it's a copy of a copy, which is Paris is a copy of something else. Who knows? But
right.
Then the last area of authenticity that you talked about is influential authenticity.
Right. That's the fifth one, where we tend to perceive as authentic anything that exerts influence in other entities, that calls human beings to a higher goal, or provides a foretaste of a better way, that basically influence us to improve the world in some way. You think about the shift toward, fair trade coffee and cause marketing and that. Those are all about having an influence on the world. And those companies that do that and do that well, not in an obviously self-serving manner, but in a manner that allows us to become part of making a difference in the world, then we're going to view those companies as authentic as well.
And again, back to that comment I was making about LOHAS, or Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability. I've attended several of their conferences, and yes, this is about a consumer movement, people buying organic foods at Whole Foods Market, but it's also a movement. You can't really separate the two. So you end up at this conference talking about such things as non-genetically modified foods and the impact on the environment of dolphin versus tuna fishing. So anyway, I think, all of those work together. And I honestly wish we had more time to specifically talk about the experience economy, but you do talk about polarity. In other words, you mentioned the Geek Squad as an interesting example of polarity. And could you explain that concept a little bit?
Well, we just found, and partly because of the influence of the Geek Squad on our thinking, that things that have this polarity that bring together unlike things into a new, unique combination will tend to be viewed as authentic. And the thing about the Geek Squad is that they're cool geeks. When I was growing up, I worked at IBM for a reason, and that was I was a nerd. I wasn't really a geek. I was a nerd. There's a difference. People keep reminding me of. But geeks were never cool. And what the Geek Squad did is that they gave them persona. They added in this law enforcement motif onto to the geek that Robert Stevens, the founder, just did a marvelous job of creating this identity for them that they do come off as cool. And that unique combination of cool geek gets them viewed as very much authentic.
Okay, so when we take this break, the assignment to our listeners is to think about what is your business polarity. I'm sure that will keep your imagination going for just a few moments. We're going to take this break, and we're going to come back and talk with Joe Pine about his fabulous newest book, Infinite Possibility.
You're listening to the FMG Radio Network, and from our family to yours, we would like to wish you a very happy holiday season and a magical new year.
Obviously, one of the things that has dramatically changed everyone's life listening to this show, and it actually has enabled them to listen to this show in the first place, is the advent of the internet and digital technology in general. And so when we've talked about mass customization, the experience economy, and authenticity, we obviously have to include the piece that's changing everything, and that's our digital lives. So what were your objectives in tackling this very big concept of infinite possibility?
Well, the objective here is basically to make sense of the explosion of digital technology into our lives, as you say. There is so much going on in so many different ways. It's very hard to get our arms around what's happening and all the different ways that you can use it in a way that businesses can then figure out what is the right thing for them to do. Jim and I are always business guys. We're trying to help businesses create economic value by providing more value to their customers. And now the way to create customer value is on this digital frontier, is to figure out what you can do to create experiences that basically fuse the real and the virtual. Whereas our last book, Authenticity, was about contrasting the real and the fake. Here in this book, which I actually co-authored with a good friend of mine, Kim Korn, is about fusing the real and the virtual to create places that people can experience and therefore gain value.
Okay, and this book is going to be coming out in August, and it's an amazingly elegant book, but I cannot say it lacks complexity because Joe and his partner Kim have created a very elegant but a little mind-bending model of the universe called the multiverse. So I wondered if you could talk about the multiverse. Now, I'd like to just briefly go through each dimension, which I'll prompt you with an example, and then you can talk about it briefly, and that'll give our listeners a brief taste of something they need to actually buy and read. So what's the multiverse? All
right. Well, I do plead guilty to the complexity here. Whereas Authenticity was philosophical, this one does have some complexity because it is just the nature of the beast. This is a complex topic, and we figured out that the best way to explain it is with a model that in fact is a 2x2x2. And I've worked with 2x2s before, no problem, right? 2x2x2s add complexity because now you're looking at 3 dimensions. Instead of 4 quadrants, you've got 8 octants that you've got to describe. But it basically is defined by the 3 fundamental dimensions by which we interact in the world. And that world of reality, of the universe that we see around us, is one that is created through time, space, and matter. And what I recognize is that each one of those has a digital counterpart, a virtual counterpart, one that takes it in the opposite direction. Matter is about the material substances that we touch and feel. It's about atoms. Well, digital technology allows us to now manipulate bits, manipulate digital substances. Space is about the real places that we inhabit, but with digital technology, we can now inhabit virtual places. So, and then finally, time is about the moment by moment and spooling of activities and events in front of us. Well, those are the actual events. Well, there are also autonomous events, so we can go outside of time, that we can stop and start and go into the past and go into the future, that we can hyperlink in some way. And those autonomous events allows us to get out of reality. So, so those are the three key dimensions, that you can create an experience with material or digital substances, and sometimes both. You can create experiences in real places or virtual places, and sometimes both. And then you can create experiences in actual events or through autonomous events, and again, sometimes both.
This fabulous book will help people really conceptualize more clearly what decisions they're making about the integration between physical reality and virtual reality, if you will. So going through the multiverse, there's 8 dimensions. I'm going to just briefly mention each one. Maybe you can elaborate some. You begin with reality, and you use the example of skiing.
Right. Reality are those very physical experiences that we have in the real world, moment by moment as we go down, such as skiing down a mountain. And one of the things that this book is not is a plea to abandon reality, because reality will now and forevermore provide the richest of experiences.
The opposite side of that is virtuality. What is that?
Well, virtuality is is no time, no space, no matter. The exact opposite of reality, where you are in a virtual place, experience things using digital technology in an autonomous way. Even this conversation we're having, Brent, is virtuality in a number of different ways. That we're using Skype to be able to talk over the internet in this. We are doing this at the same time, but those that are listening to it are all going to be later. It's going to be asynchronous to what we're doing, and then when they're listening to it, they can pause it, they can rewind, they can go to the forward, they can play with the time that we have. It's not this linear experience. That can be a very non-linear experience, and virtuality enables that.
Okay, so now let's go back to reality, and you talk about augmented reality. You mentioned the Garmin as an example.
Yeah, augmented reality is when you use digital technology to enhance the real world experience in some way. And I think the simplest example to see that is with a navigator like the Garmin. That you've got the real world out in front of you, in front of that windshield, but now you get this little piece of digital technology that enhances that experience, both visually and orally, telling you, auditorily, I guess, telling you to go this way or that, and that augments the reality in front of you. The primary experience is still in reality, but let's augment that through the digital technology.
We're going to have time really to talk about one more. This is an 8-part model. So we're going to have to leave our audience teasing them, but let's talk just to give them the idea of the flip side of virtuality, or the enhancement of virtuality, is augmented virtuality. What's that?
Right, and that it's augmented virtuality. When I figured that out is when I finally realized that, hey, this is a model that does make sense. This really is going to help business people. But augmented virtuality is the exact opposite of augmented reality. It's when you use not digital technology to enhance a real world experience, but rather use material substances to enhance a virtual experience. And the simplest example here, and this is when it hit me, is when Nintendo announced the Wii. And you think about what the Wii does is it allows you to now use this material substance of a controller, so that the experience is no longer, between your thumbs and fingers in your brain, but rather it involves the whole body. It augments this virtual experience materially, physically, in a way. And Microsoft's Kinect takes that to a whole new level by allowing you to get rid of the controller, and where your physical body becomes the material substance enhancing that experience.
A good lead on this one is that really the boomer future is going to be a lot about augmented virtuality and probably augmented reality as well, of course. But the Wii has become highly popular in assisted living facilities and even nursing homes to keep older people engaged and active so that they don't have to go to a bowling alley. They can bowl with the Wii and get some of the physical exercise that they need to stay healthy and avoid frailty. So that's a huge area for explosion of innovation in the next 10 to 20 years. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I absolutely agree, and I think there is going to be an explosion of all of these different ways that we can use digital technology, because and what the book does is it really helps people to make sense of that, figure out what's right for them, to find exactly the right opportunities to create value for the business amidst the infinite possibility that is now in front of us on the digital frontier.
What we like to talk about in the last segment of the show, we've in effect talked about, and that is the future and the boomer future in particular. And, you know, we could spend an entire hour on just infinite possibility. The book is coming out in about a month from the time this show is being recorded. I very much encourage you to take a look at it so you not only can learn more about the 4 areas that we just talked about, the 4 dimensions, but you can also learn about alternate reality, physical virtuality, warped reality, and mirrored virtuality. And if you're designing a business for the future, you better understand all 8 dimensions and make some deliberate decisions going forward, as well as the experience you're creating for customers and the authentic way you're rendering those experiences. I want to thank you for joining the show today. It's been a privilege to have you on, Joe, and I would love to have you back in the future where we can really drill down on infinite possibility, because obviously, you know, it's a book that deserves time unto itself because it's going to control so much of the future of product development innovation, particularly as it pertains to an aging population.
I would love to come back, Brent, and talk with you further.
Thank you, Joe, for joining us today and informing us about marketing in the 21st century, which inevitably includes creating indelible customer experiences, developing authentic brands, and capturing the opportunities of the digital frontier. Find out more about Joe's work by visiting the primary website for his company, which in itself is an experience where you can view many videos that he and his partner Jim Gilmore have produced, and you can find it by typing strategichorizons.com. That's strategichorizons.com. Thanks to you, our listeners, for joining this show. If you'd like to learn more about boomers and technology and the digital future, check out my most recent book, Generation Reinvention. Post your comments and questions on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Brent Green Denver, which separates me from all 110 other Brent Greens in the United States. Or you can follow me and send direct messages to me on Twitter, and that's at Boomer Marketing. You can also send messages to Joe Pine and follow him at Joe Pine. My blog, now beginning its 6th year, presents a continuing conversation about the boomer future, and you can find it at boomers.typepad.com. So tell your friends, colleagues, and clients about a worldwide boomer revolution discussed here weekly called Generation Reinvention.
You've been listening to Generation Reinvention with your host, Brent Green. Visit Brent at his website at generationreinvention.com. And for archive shows, be sure to visit his show page here on the FMG Radio Network, where our motto is have fun, make money.